Now, the U.S. intelligence knew the Chinese had captured these two crafts inside Mongolia. We also knew that they had recovered another craft in far northwestern China. Despite their peaceful intentions, these aliens were treated with hostility by the Han people, or the Chinese people that lived in that area. We knew the Chinese government was extremely interested in UFOs, since they actually had extraterrestrials living in their country. Hello, my name is Richard Doty. I'm a former intelligence officer with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Today's presentation is going to be on secret listening devices and secret listening locations inside the Republic of China. Yes, that's true. The National Security Agency had secret listening sites inside China. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how they negotiated the sites and what these sites actually done. In the late 1970s, the U.S. established two secret listening sites. And I call them listening sites. They're similar to radar stations, but they're listening sites inside the Republic of China. Yes, inside Communist China in the 1970s. In 1972, if you can remember back that far, President Nixon met with Mao Zedong, the leader of China, in China. The primary mission there was to free some POWs that we had, including some CIA agents that were caught way back in the 50s. But secretly, the United States was negotiating with Chinese government to place listening devices and stations inside China to spy on Russia. The first NSA post was 𝗪𝗘𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘, a town set in the northern foothills of the Taichen mountain range in Sikkim province, western China, the most western part of China. The second site was established at 𝗪𝗧, just on the other side of the mountain, or the south side of the mountain, south of 𝗪𝗘𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘. Along with these listening posts, the American government also established two long-range tracking dishes on top of Taichen Mountain. Now, as I said earlier, President Nixon negotiated this with the Chinese government. And the reason we did this was China was as interested in the Soviet Union and what they were doing as we were. Now, we did have listening stations in Iran back in the late 70s, but when the Shah fell, the Shah of Iran fell in 1979, we lost those posts. We lost all our bases that we had in Iran. So we had to seek someplace else to put these listening stations. And China was the most opportune place because it was right next to China and right next to where the Soviet Union's missile sites were located. All their test stations were in an area just on the other side of the border with China. Tarantum and 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 are the two locations that we were interested in, as was the Chinese. So we negotiated with the Chinese to build these stations. Now, the manning of these stations was a joint effort. The Chinese technicians that were trained, believe it or not, by the CIA in California and New Mexico, and special U.S. Air Force personnel manned these stations. They sat right next to each other, the Chinese and the Air Force personnel. Each one of them learned the other's language. So the Chinese technician knew English and the Air Force technician knew Chinese. We also, of course, had Russian linguists to tap into Russian language and Russian activity on the other side of the border. The Chinese personnel were all from a special directorate within the Chinese Army that dealt exclusively with technical intelligence. In 1982, the Defense Intelligence Agency became involved with operations at 𝗪𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 and 𝗪𝗧. Through classified contacts and through a company, a U.S. company called Motorola, we developed a method of scanning systems to collect certain frequencies from equipment at both 𝗪𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 and 𝗪𝗧. Now, these frequency collectors, or a method of collecting frequencies, entailed some complex electronics. And that was all built into the equipment at both 𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 and Corolla. Unbeknownst to the Chinese government, we secretly placed this advanced electronics equipment that collected frequencies in the equipment. Ironically, DIA found out that these signals that we were collecting wasn't from the Russians, wasn't from the Soviet missile bases on the other side of the border. Actually, they're the same frequencies that we knew that the extraterrestrials communicated in. So we were collecting extraterrestrial frequencies and signals from these listening posts inside China. We're also interested in what the Chinese government knew about ET technology. We knew that the Chinese government had been investigating this stuff, UFO activity, for many, many years. Back in the 50s, we knew Chinese was collecting intelligence regarding UFO activities. Sightings of UFOs were all over China, and particularly in outer Mongolia, which is today Mongolia. Incidents happened in Mongolia, including 2 crash sites that the Chinese government went in, unbeknownst to the Mongolian government, and recovered debris at these 2 crash sites. Now, the U.S. intelligence knew the Chinese had captured these two crafts inside Mongolia. We also knew that they had recovered another craft in far northwestern China, in Sikkim province. Now, China had a long history of collecting artifacts, archaeological history, I should say, about collecting artifacts that were not known to the Chinese dynasties. But in 1938, Chinese archaeologists discovered strange stone discs in a remote mountain cave. And these discs were called the 𝗪𝗧𝗧 stones, sometimes called the 𝗪𝗧𝗧 discs. The stones tell the story of a space probe from a distant planet that crash landed in 𝗪𝗚𝗕𝗦𝗬𝗧𝗘 mountains of the Himalayas 12,000 years ago. The occupants of the spacecraft found refuge in caves. Despite their peaceful intentions, these aliens were treated with hostility by the Han people, or the Chinese people that lived in that area. The Han tribe people hunted down their 𝗪𝗧𝗧 visitors and sometimes crucified them or actually killed them. The translation of one of the passages on the stone reads, "The 𝗪𝗧𝗧 came down from the clouds in their flying crafts. The men, women, and children hid in the caves 10 times before sunrise. They realized that the newcomers had peaceful intentions." The stones go on to say how the 𝗪𝗧𝗧 were able to repair their craft, but didn't have the proper equipment to fuel the craft and return to their home planet. Over the years, stories have emerged from China regarding a military archaeological team that came across discs, more discs, in a region of the 𝗪𝗧 Mountains that contain hieroglyphics. They collected 700 of these stone discs. Now, this all played into what the United States wanted to know about China and wanted to know about their UFO activities. So with that information regarding the stone tablets, we knew the Chinese government was extremely interested in UFOs, since they actually had extraterrestrials living in their country. Going back to the radar stations or the listening devices and listening stations that we had inside China, the signals collected at both 𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 and Corolla by listening reflects numerous UFO landings in western portions of Zhanjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, which is, again, the most western part of China. Heavy UFO activity reported from 1980 to 1982 around this area. and along the Soviet-Chinese border. Now, we were collecting this information with these listening devices and posts that we had inside China. All that information was being reported back to the Defense Intelligence Agency. What we were going to do with it? Well, we had to figure out what the Chinese was going to do with it, because they were collecting different signals from different sources. But ironically, what we were collecting and what we knew the Chinese were collecting were the exact same signals. But these sources within the Chinese government reported abductions occurring in rural areas of Western China, right along where these UFOs were landing, and right along where the signals were being detected. In fact, we knew of one particular incident where an entire family of 5 were abducted in plain sight in front of local villagers near the village of 𝗪𝗕𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘, and that was in Western China. The family was never seen again. This occurred right during the daylight hours, where a UFO landed and somehow attracted this family. All 5 of them walked up to the UFO. They got in and they left. This was witnessed by, again, many villagers. Another incident occurred near the Russian border, where 2 Chinese military officers were abducted from their jeep near the military base at Xining, which is right in the northwestern portion of China, just a few kilometers from the Russian border. In 1983, a UFO landed in a remote area east of Xining. Chinese military radar had tracked the craft flying from inside the Soviet Union, thinking that the craft might be something that the Russian was sending over, maybe a drone. The Chinese Air Force launched fighter jets to intercept the craft. However, the craft landed rather than the Chinese military planes finding it in the air. The Chinese military ground forces were sent to the area, and according to voice intercepts, meaning voices that we collected from other intelligence listening posts around China, there was a confrontation between the occupants of the alien craft and the Chinese soldiers. The result of this confrontation caused the Chinese government to take all UFO sightings extremely serious. Now, exactly what happened at that confrontation, we don't know. We know there was a confrontation. We know by the voice intercepts that the Chinese soldiers were extremely scared of what was going on and that shots had been fired. In 1984, Chinese ground-to-air missiles shot down an alien craft that landed in the area of Kashi, which is in, again, that region of China. In 1985, a secret created team of Chinese military and U.S. Air Force personnel met to discuss UFO activity inside China. Some information from the UFO activity within the United States was shared with the Chinese. We actually shared information about crash sites and contacts that were occurring inside the United States, either currently or historically, with the Chinese government, as they shared incidents that occurred inside China with the United States Air Force personnel. But most of the highly sensitive cases that happened inside China was not shared with U.S. intelligence. However, we knew about it. We had other sources of information that collected intelligence inside China. And we knew of UFO cases, incidents, crash sites that had happened inside China. What we gained by these listening sites inside China was a vast amount of knowledge. Of course, the problem is getting that information out. The tapes, the recording tapes, the collection devices that we were using had to be shared with the Chinese government. But remember, NSA placed these special devices inside this listening station that was only known to us, the United States Air Force. But the problem was getting that information out of the machines and back to DIA to be analyzed. So they set up a courier system at these two sites, Chai Tea and Corolla, whereby we had to take the materials, share them with the Chinese, transport them to an airfield about 10 kilometers away, put them on an Air Force military plane, and fly them out of China to the closest place, which was in Islamabad, Pakistan. And from there, they went to a secret NSA site inside Australia. Of course, we know now what that site inside Australia was. It was Alice Springs. That was where the NSA base for the southern part of the Indian Ocean was located. Once we got that information, we got these tapes, NSA analyzed them and sent them back to their headquarters in Washington, D.C. at Fort Meade, and also shared them with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And lo and behold, we found extraordinary information on these discs. We found not only the frequencies that were being transmitted by the ETs, but also new frequencies that the extraterrestrials were using to operate remote aircrafts. Yes, you heard me right. Remote UFOs were being flown inside China. Now, we suspected this, that it was occurring in the United States, but we had no proof that these remote crafts controlled by the ETs were occurring. We knew, and we suspected that they had these remote crafts, but we didn't know how they worked. But based on what information we got from the Chinese, and by the listening devices we had, and the listening stations that we had inside China, we deducted the fact that these ETs were coming to Earth, staying in the outer atmosphere, and sending in drones, same drones that we operate, same type of drones that we operate today. The fact that we have drones, they had drones, remotely operated, and they were spying on not only China, but the United States, and I'm sure other countries. We had no control over how to counter that. Our technology wasn't advanced enough to fully understand how the ETs were controlling these devices and how far away they were controlling them. We collected this information. Remember, this is back in the 1980s. And we didn't know what to do with it then. Now, these two listening stations inside China are still there today, but they're operated differently. They're operated more openly, and they're not so much keeping track of the Soviets, or they're not Soviets anymore, of course. They're Russians. The Russians are still an enemy of the United States, and China considers the Russians enemy of China. So we're still trying to collect information from inside China using these stations. It's more difficult today, even in an open society, because the Chinese government is more aware of what we are doing and more aware of how we operate. So this presentation gives you, the viewers, a glimpse of what we were doing inside China in the late 70s and 1980s. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I'm Richard Doty.
If you liked this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.